Stephen King, you have a wonderful chapter in Grave New World, The New Imperium. How's that new imperium going? Is President Trump an example of the new imperium?
Well, I guess the US was the new imperium when we got to the end of the Second World War and it became the dominant power. And it became particularly dominant, of course, after 1989 and the fall of the Berlin Wall. What's happened more recently, I think, is that partly because of the rise of China, the US is no longer quite so confident to be, if you like, the world's sort of dominant power, has walked away from some of the responsibilities it previously was happy to have. So one obvious example is walking away from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Obviously, there have been sort of rumbles which are relevant for this week in terms of commitment towards NATO. But of course, it also reflects the fact that China has grown so rapidly over the last 20 years or so.
You nail it. Confidence. Where is the European confidence? I mean, I look at Macron, Merkel, and I read all the other stuff. Wolfgang Munchau is brilliant in EFT today. Where right now is the Europe confidence?
Well, Europe, I think, has a kind of structural problem. And actually, to understand it, you probably have to go back to Japan's experience over the last 20 or 30 years. You know, Japan was growing at a perfectly reasonable rate. Then it starts to have the kind of population aging story coming through very quickly in the 1990s. It tries to offset that through additional government borrowing, higher levels of government debt. But ultimately, Japan has really stagnated since the 1990s. And Europe, maybe 20, 30 years later, is going through the same kind of demographic difficulty. You look at Italy, it's almost on a par with the Japanese aging population story in recent times. Germany is not far behind. And so for all those reasons, Europe has a significant structural difficulty in terms of the pace of economic growth. And one of the problems with that is that when you say to the central bank, to the ECB, it's time to do something more about growth, well, of course, monetary policy can't do very much, particularly in Europe. Negative interest rates. So then you start talking about fiscal policy, and in one sense it seems like an obvious thing to do because interest rates themselves are very low. It's easy to afford additional levels of debt. But as Japan has demonstrated, unless you actually spend that money very, very wisely indeed, the chances are you don't get the improvement in productivity you ultimately need to make the economy work well.